I'll start sharing once I do my little intro here. So my name is Patrick Crawford. The goal for this session, finally getting to that point, is to talk about error reporting. And so the idea is to set up a very simple wrapper within a Blender add-on to allow users to report errors. And so the session that I'm going to be giving here is essentially a little bit of a tutorial about how you can use a repository that I set up to do error reporting. The intent is that you are limiting the distance between the users that are having the errors and the information to the developer. And so instead of having to go through some customer support or ask them to send an email or sign up to GitHub to log in to write an issue and log something, you're giving inside of Blender a one-click direct way to report an issue, and then the user can move on off their day, and the developer can then know about this to prioritize their time. All right, long-winded intro done there. I'll go ahead and share my screen, but just for your own reference, this is already out there and live. So again, my name is the Duck Cow, and the repository is the duckcow/user-report-wrapper. I'm sure we'll also post links somewhere afterwards as well. And yes, so the idea here is to provide a module that's very easy for other add-on developers to use to then integrate to their add-ons about major changes and then just kind of get this reporting features and functionalities for free. And so kind of what this allows you to do is kind of set it and forget it, ideally, to a certain degree. So you basically install this module or code into your add-on, and then it wraps around all of your execution functions inside of Blender, i.e. in Blender, when you press a button, it runs a bit of code. It kind of acts as a container around that code that normally is ran. And then if there's an error that occurs, this code will kick in, show a display dialog, and tell the user, hey, there was an error, do you want to report it? And then the idea beyond this is to keep it simple because, a lot of add-on developers don't have a lot of time. They may be newer to development. They may not be expert coders with tens of years of experience. And so we're kind of lowering the tech bar as far as possible with this by making the backend super simple. It's just a Google form and a spreadsheet, which anyone can manage. You're not talking about advanced databases or anything like this. Although, of course, that is a good direction to go if you're really in a scaled production environment with lots of users. But for just having something simple that works, this is a great starting point because it's not using anything that's proprietary. It's all free. And unless you have a bazillion users of your add-on or your code, you're not really going to run into limits with this. So if I go into Blender, so the add-on I have installed is very, very simple. It's literally only under the help menu, and it is two operators, one that just works. You can maybe see at the very bottom, it prints out a no issues here notice, and then another operator which says, oh, there was an error. So basically, it just triggers an exception. And so again, this is the simplest possible case of an add-on, but the idea is to control or put around this add-on the steps of error reporting so that when I use this operator, I actually get the option to report that this issue happened to the actual developer. And so let's go ahead and do that. So if I go back into my GitHub here, I acknowledge that I actually kind of threw these steps together a little bit last minute, so they're not fully fleshed out, but this will be more of a complete documentation later in time. But the first step is if I have downloaded or have my existing add-on. So let's say we have our user report demo over here. The first step that I want to do is from this repository, which if I want, I can clone from over here. And for my case, I just have it in another window, so I'm going to copy over files that way. But the idea is the first step is just very plain simple. You copy over the module that this repository implements. And that is the user_reporting module. I'm pasting it in over here. All right, so that's our first step. So we have the code from the repository. Everything else that's in this repo over here is just kind of boilerplate or just kind of wrapper to make it a live demo. But really the only code you should need is this user_reporting here. So this is what you would import into your own add-on to get all the features. Now, the next step after that is to actually register. You need to use the module. And so I have my Sublime window over here, or use whatever text editor of choice. And so if I go into this, I can see I now have this user reporting file. This is what I just copied over. And so this is already self-incomplete. You'll notice at the very, very, very end of it, we have our typical register and unregister functions that you might be familiar with. So with this module now existing, what I need to do is go into my init.py file, and then I need to import this module. And so in this case, I have a little bit of a reloading setup that makes it so that I can reload Addons inside of Blender without having to restart. If I update my code and so forth, you'll see a lot of add-ons do this. But the thing you want to do is, for instance, from dot, meaning my local directory, import, and then user reporting. And in the same way, I'm going to duplicate this import reload line here, and then do the same. Now, so that's done the reloading of the module, but now we need to actually run the registration of it. Again, we've just loaded the libraries, but we haven't actually triggered the registration of the operators and so forth. And so to do that, it's going to be nearly the same as you would for other modules. But in this case, we're going to use user reporting, and then register is in fact the function still, but instead of just passing through nothing, we pass through the BL info. So the BL info, this is basically telling the add-on its own version and some information about it. And actually, to that point, maybe it's helpful to understand what the output of all this is. So I'm going to take a slight pause. So we're registering the add-on. We need to pass in some information about the add-on so that we can report on this to the developer, right? Because you want to know things like what's the version of Blender, what's the version of the add-on, things like that. So if I go into my example setup here, so you'll find that later on, we're going to get to the stage where we actually have a form that we create. The form looks like this, for instance. And the idea is that when you have an error occurring in Blender, a pop-up comes up and then gives you a link which opens in your browser a pre-filled out version of this form. So the idea is the user just comes to this web page, and all they have to do is press submit without thinking much further about it. The end state for the developer is something like this, where you have a spreadsheet that has all of the answers, so to speak, or really the reports that you've gotten from the user. And so the useful things we're getting here, again, there's a timestamp from the user actually submitted it, but then we get the add-on version. This is the live installed version of the add-on that the user had at that time, as well as the live version of Blender that it was coming from. And so this add-on version here, this information, we get that by passing in BL info. So that's why it's a little bit different from other registrations. We actually need that information. There are other ways you can kind of extract it, but this is kind of the safest and cleanest way to get the version information here. And that's honestly the only thing it's passing through. This Blender version here, that is more just metadata about the add-ons compatibility. Don't trust it. In fact, this add-on's designed to actually work down to Blender 2.7x. It's just the 2.8 series disables add-ons if it claims to be supporting 2.7x. So again, it's just pulling in the information there. As long as we're looking at the kind of schema or the output of the error reporting, you have, of course, the error message itself. It tries to take just the last bit of the error messaging. This could be made much more advanced than it is right now. But again, it's functional. You can see things like, all right, what's the actual line of code that this error was coming from? What was like the last statement? What was the actual exception? And then, most importantly, like what was the file it was coming from? And if it's not too long of an error, you even get some of the historical, the hierarchy of it. Pretty synonymous to what you would see in your console printout, but it removes things like a user's like path. Like you don't want their whole computer's directory hierarchy to where the Blender install is. That's personal information, one, and two, it's kind of unnecessary to the developer. We just need the relative path of the add-on, and so we kind of have this placeholder there. And then we have information like the platform, like what is the actual user's computer that uses. You can see in this case, I was on a Mac while making this demo, so I have my computer showing up there. And then, if there's optional fields in your user report, then, they could write in something there. All right, so that's the output of all of this. So going back in here, we now are registering our user reporting module, and after importing it, so the next step is really to kind of integrate it with our add-on. So it's registered, but it's not actually really doing anything yet. So we need to use the wrapper. And so the way we do this is, I'm actually going to cheat a little bit by just going over to my final state solution, if you will. If I go into my operators code, well, so let me start there. So operators, this is the add-on that I have implemented. So if you recall, in Blender, we have these two functions, no error and with error. No error just triggering like a happy face notification, and demo error is the one that triggers this error here. But what it looks like in code is really these two things here. Here, no errors, and here, under the error triggering operator, it just is forcing this raised exception, which is the Python way of asserting there's an error, triggering a UI notification. And so we don't want to like prevent developers from using this. Plus, you always have scenarios where the code you're running isn't perfect and it will run into an exception anyway. So the idea is to keep this functioning best we can. But again, as I mentioned, we're going to wrap these execution functions with the user reporting module. And so what that looks like is in front of the execute module, we're actually going to put a decorator, which is a Pythonic way of wrapping a function, if you will. So to do that, we're going to do our same import here. So from, actually, let's see how I do it. I think I do from, yeah, so from the local directory, we're going to import user reporting, and then from user reporting, what we're going to do is wrap the execution function, starting with this @ symbol, and then we're going to use user reporting dot, I think I called it reporting. No, I called it wrapper. All right. So user reporting dot wrapper. And so now this is decorating our function here. And so if I paste the same exact thing to this other execution, now it's wrapping this function. And we can go into what this looks like if we have time. But at this point, our function is now effectively wrapped. And so if I were to go in and run this now, we actually would have a apparently looking working solution. But to get there, again, this is coming from our demo file. It's not actually set up for us. We haven't created a Google form yet or anything. So really the next step is to create a new Google form. I'm going to skip a bit of that, but just go ahead and show the form that we briefly looked at before. So again, outside of the Blender context, we have this form. This is just an interface to get data into a spreadsheet. It's convenient because it's something that anyone can have access to without logging into anything. You can be in an incognito window. You don't need a Gmail or anything. And as a developer, you don't have to worry about authorization in any way. Like you're not connecting to a database. You're not connecting to an API or anything where you have to be careful about having API keys sitting somewhere in your code. You're just opening a page in the user's web browser. And for the user, ideally, they're just clicking submit. Like they're not actually having to do anything more than that. And that's like a really key thing about this whole process is that you're making the time to deliver a report as minimal as possible, because what you want as a developer, oddly enough, is as much volume as possible in terms of responses. So if 10 users encountered an error, you want all 10 of them to report it, I would say. But in reality, if you have a login wall or some barriers to report, instead of 10, it may be 2, it may be 1, it may be 0. But if you're reducing the number of clicks down to, in this case, it's 2, they click OK in Blender, and then they click onto this form, they click submit. Maybe at least 6 out of those 10 users would report this. And now, as a developer, you have a history of the most commonly reported issues in your add-on to focus your time on. And so that's why, again, the idea is with the least amount of code, get the least amount of clicks to report an error. Hence, we're using this form. So the 5 fields that we have in our example here is, if they want to add in additional information, fine. It's just a free paragraph form question. But then we have our error message, as well as our add-on version, Blender version, and platform. These last 4 are the ones that we want to automatically populate via our error reporting in Blender. And so the way we do this, once we have our form, which, by the way, there's nothing fancy else going on here. These are all just short answer responses, except for the error message is a long answer. Just we can have new lines, as well as the optional field. Obviously, you can add more fields if you want. if there's other things you want to track as a part of this. But the way that we want to then translate this into something that Blender can pre-populate, that's where we use prefilled links. So prefilled links is something that you can create from the, is it the gear icon? I always forget. Maybe it's over here. Yes, so under the 3 dots next to the send, you'll find there's an option for get a prefilled link. So if you go ahead and click this, you enter this kind of special mode. It pops out into another tab where basically you're given the interface to answer the form in a way so that you get a link that would have the same answers filled out. And so basically what we're going to do is fill this out. So I'm going to call this error, call this version, call this Blender, call that platform. And I don't have to answer my optional ones. I don't need to use them anyways. But what this is going to do is when I click get link, I now have a link. I'll copy it down here. That if I go into Sublime and just open up a new window here, if I paste this in, I'll make it a little bit larger. You'll see that this is a long string, which is the URL, which has all my answers filled out. And the thing that this does for us is it exposes the underlying IDs of each of these questions inside of the form. And so because I filled out error message with the literal text error, I can go in here, kind of search for it, and I say, okay, error is this one, and it corresponds to this ID here. So this entry dot, and then it's 1023, etc. That is the ID of that question in the form. And so now we can basically hijack this and kind of fill out whatever we want. So instead of error, we can pass the data from Blender. And so what we're going to be doing is constructing this URL dynamically, but we know ahead of time what these IDs are that correspond to the different questions in our web form. And so that really brings us to the next step, which is generating a pre-filled link. And excuse my lack of images in my slammed together README here. So now what we need to do is go back into the code and tell Blender or our add-on about this mapping. And so if I go into our user reporting module that we copied over at the very top, you're going to see a few all capitalized global variables, which we want to adjust for our situation. So first and foremost, line 31 here, error reporter demo. This is something you do absolutely want to customize. Typically, you would say like my add-on name. In fact, maybe I'm going to do that in the future, rename it to that so it's a bit more obvious. This is one of the keys that's used to register the operator, which is the pop-up for this reporting system. So if you don't do this and 2 people have add-ons installed that haven't changed this ID and they're using this reporting system, it's basically going to have an error. So you don't want to clash with another developer. So very important you change this. This ID here is the ID of our web form, or our Google form rather. And so if I go into my form, you can go into either the edit or even the pre-filled one, but essentially it's just this ID up here. It's between the d/ or the d/e/ and the edit or the parameters. So this is the exact identifier for this form. And so that's what we want to have pasted in here. Again, you want to have this customized for your own form, of course. And then we have our versions here. These are, actually, yeah, this is not the same one. Okay, yep, so I guess I'll fill this out. So these are the IDs that map our questions that we expect to fill out inside of Blender with the actual forms IDs. So here, if we go back to the URL, the pre-filled URL we captured, you just copy over these IDs, paste them into each of these, and then now we have the actual mappings of the fields that we want to pass in from the wrapper to the web form. So I have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to maybe skip a little bit ahead and not just go do that, just so we can get to a bit more of the analysis side, which I think is interesting. So we've updated the form fields, and I guess we've already decorated the execute functions. I'm jumping around a little bit. The next thing we would do is honestly just test it. So in Blender, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit and go to add-ons, user reporting. I'm going to disable my demo here and enable my already created one so I don't have to reload it into Blender. If I go down in here under the help menu, you'll see I have, again, my 2 functions. I actually have a third one that I've added as well. But my no demo, this is running with the execution wrapper. When I press it, nothing different happens because there was no error. That's as we expect. It's non-intrusive. But now when I click on the demo with error, I click on this. Now we get this pop up. To the user, it looks about the same. We still see the error message, but now we're saying a little message, oh, press OK to open and submit report in a browser. So if I press OK now, it opens up my browser, it opens up a new tab, and boom, it's already filled out this error message. And so ideally, again, as me as a user, I don't want to spend any more time on this. I already know I have an error. I'm not going to give additional information. I'm just going to go press here, submit, and then boom, now it's submitted, and I move on with my day. Maybe a little bit irate because I had an error. As the developer, we now see this in real time in our spreadsheet, of course. And so here you can see the message that we just filled out. Maybe I should have added a message to make it a little bit unique. And so that's basically it. So now you have a wrapper that you can use for all of your functions. Again, it's truly at this point as simple as importing this statement and then putting one line in front of all your execution functions. And now you have very easy low-tech error reporting for your users to allow you to monitor and track your progress of your add-on. Now, the next steps after that, I'll spend 5 minutes on this, or at least until I'm kicked off, to say like, okay, as a developer, what do you do with this? Like, it's great to have these error reports, but if you have thousands of users and you're getting, thousands of error reports, hopefully less, then is it just an information overload? Like, is that helpful for anyone? Are you going to be able to keep up with that? What can you do with this? And so that's where I'm going to jump into a little bit more of my personal experience. Again, the key point is you now have a repository for this. You could, do things like, all right, let's collate the issues and then push them to GitHub, for instance, right? So maybe you still want to use GitHub or GitLab or whatever system's issue tracking mechanism. But again, you didn't want to force users to go in and create an account. So now you can maybe do this in bulk on their behalf. You can actually still log all these if you want. I think a first step before you do that, of course, is collating those errors. And so what I have here is in my raw form, again, these columns A through F, this is the output of the form, which you would get from, if I go into edit and I look at responses and I go into here, I can click on, well, it's really just this icon here to view the responses in a spreadsheet or create a spreadsheet. We haven't done this step already. Once I've done that, I can jump into the spreadsheet and I can see all my responses. These are the pre-filled ones that are coming from the web form. These are the questions in the form. I can add additional columns. Nothing stops me from doing that. It's still just a normal spreadsheet for the most part. And so what I've done here is I've actually added 2 calculated columns to the right. And so this function here, it does a little bit of parsing, if you will, just to kind of consolidate the errors. In this context, you don't really see a difference, but in other add-ons, if you have long tracebacks, essentially this is just a short formula to just look at the last 22 characters with some, catching. But essentially, it's just casting this into a more unique, smaller, contained error message. If I do this, now I can add another column, which basically looks at this column G, our now shortened snippet of the error. And it can see, hey, I've seen this one here 3 times versus another error, which has only been seen once. And so all of a sudden I can now, if I had 100 people reporting this error, I'm not overburdened as a developer. I can see, oh, wait, this specific message has been reported 100 times. I'm going to prioritize doing this over something else, which maybe one person reported an issue on GitHub and no one else has experienced. This is giving me the data to work on what I should be working on in that sense. And so to look at a bit more of a real example, I have done this with my own add-on, MC Prep, which is used for like Minecraft animations. In this case, I'm not using a web form as a backend, but I'm using a database, if you will. But it all ultimately functions the same way. I have a database, and I have a function which I then use to push it to a spreadsheet for my kind of manual manipulations. So in the spreadsheet, you can see, I know, maybe shame on me, I have a lot of error reports. But the nice kind of analysis I can do with this is, all right, let's say I want to find out what's like the most important issue I want to fix right now. I'll go into here maybe I don't care about errors that reported very old versions of my add-on. So I'm just going to go into 3222. That's the latest I have developed. I'm going to filter this. Again, if you have a very large spreadsheet, maybe a little slow. So, again, you can think about how to scale this differently in another system. But all right, I have the same thing. I have my error short symbol here. This is the thing that kind of just takes off the beginning part of my error messages and kind of collates them. And then boom, I can see that, all right, there was 141 people who reported this issue here, which happens to be a null error message. So maybe something else went wrong or is a manual sort of trigger. But then the next most common one is this one here. And it's happened 36 times, or at least reported 36 times across this version. And so then I can see, all right, so this is my shortened error message, but let me go and what is the actual error message? All right, this is the thing I need to fix. This is some compatibility thing I need to go and resolve because that many people have reported it. Other things I can do on top of that is, let's say I was in a previous version of my add-on and I thought I fixed something. Let's say I was in version 3.21, and in this version, the most commonly reported thing was, what is this one here? Has to do with generating. It's like basically it's using a version or an attribute that doesn't exist in Blender for the version of Blender is using, so it's throwing an error. So I have this error message that has been reported 67 times. I can say, okay, that's good to know. Let me clear my version, clear that out, and let me just prove to myself that this isn't still being reported. Did I actually solve this error? When we make updates, typically we try and make sure that we have done that. But now I can kind of just search for this shadow here. I can see only one entry coming up. And now I'm filtering for that exact error message. Again, it may take a moment, but now I can go and look at my version and say, is this happening anywhere in any other versions reported? Nope, that means I actually solved it. Obviously, this is only the tip of the iceberg of the analysis you can sort of do. You can do pivots. You can kind of check your versioning. I think I even have some like pivot tables that I set up on top of this to kind of track like what are the errors per version. Am I introducing more new errors and I'm fixing things like that? These are all things you can do, which are very useful. And again, the goal is to save your time as a developer and save the frustration of your users by working on the things that people are actually having issues with. This is not a supplement to good unit testing or good testing frameworks. You should have that on top of this, but let a good error reporting system catch you where you're maybe not quite filling all the cracks with your testing suite. All right, so
awesome.
That's my talk. Thank you for listening.
That was great, Patrick. Thank you so much. I don't think we have any questions. Let me just double check that. Nope, I don't think we have any questions in the talk. I'm sure you'll probably get some after the talk, but thank you so much. That was really excellent.
Yeah, for sure. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, my name is The Duck Cow, all one word. Website, Twitter, YouTube, etc. So reach out to me on chat or one of those avenues. Thanks again.